on the chat at the same time. That was funny.
Well, it was great too, because people were asking questions and I was like, well, I mean, I can't just sit here and answer them. I do know the answers. So I just did that.
Cool. On the chat at the
Yeah, and now we're just gonna give it part two. You guys, we were just laughing because I've never been locked out of my own eat and greet before. And the moon is opposing Uranus right now, and whew, it's a day for the internet, isn't it?
It is a day for the internet.
Okay, so I'm back and I can participate in the conversation now. So
yes.
let's
so back to what you were asking me how I got into it. It was when I started seeing this stuff that I was saying, wow, this is just amazing. Because the stuff that he did, let me get this back up. This stuff that he did, was originally stuff that he did for the 20th century. And, you follow the graphs and you could see the cycles of wars and economic upturns and downturns. This graph actually saved my mind last year because, there were good astrological reasons. Besides, you didn't have to have this graph to know that something pretty amazing was coming in 2020. But I happened to have, several years ago, I was teaching a mundane class, and one of the students in my class, who is a chiropractor, was very interested in looking at all the pandemics, as her mundane project. And I said, sure, throw all your heart and soul into it. Great. She was looking at the 1918 pandemic astrologically, and she said, Lee, we're just about at this. And she had it pegged for 2020. And, but you could see things forming in 2019. And she kept saying, nope, we're not there yet. Nope, we're not there yet. What's interesting to me is when you could see the things forming is actually apparently when COVID happened. Because astrologically, when I was working on it last year, I could see that it extended back to sometime around the Cancer ingress of 2019. But this was going to be, this was definitely going to be the problem child area. And the point, and this is, as I said, this is what saved my mind, was seeing that there's nothing of this magnitude before 2050. And I ain't going to make it past that. Or if I do, I'm not going to be worrying about anything. So it's like, okay, on the usual level, what's the astrology doing for me? I'm off scot-free after this.
Yes.
So
you can see the dips, but you can also see the change in the cycle.
Yeah. You can see here with the way that it graphs. Now, what they're basically doing in all these things, and as I say, this isn't the limit of what you can get out of this. We'll talk about it in some other modes, but this is kind of like a first, bullseye on it. You're looking at the outer cycles of, the outer planet cycles, and this is basically you're going from Jupiter through Pluto. Now, the thing about Jupiter through Pluto, with the exception of Jupiter Saturn, Jupiter Uranus, Jupiter Neptune, Jupiter Pluto are all cycles that are very close in length to the Jupiter cycle itself. Jupiter takes about 12 years to go around the zodiac. You get into the other three Jupiter cycles, and they're all about 14, 13 years. And now that was basically the basis of some material, for example, that Richard Tarnas had looked at in his work on looking at history associated with cycles. And what I realized is when you're talking about this and you've got a cycle that's about 12 years long. I'm going to say 12 because it divides by so many numbers, Stormie. So, if I start doing 14, we're getting into some odd decimals. But if you've got a cycle that's roughly around 12, if you're doing the hard aspects, which is what everybody does because the hard aspects are going to be, the really obvious in your face things, then that means that about every 3 years, you've got something going on. Mm-hmm. And I realized, no, that's a little too short. The thing about mundane astrology, the way it's structured, is you've got basically one set of rules, and then you've got different systems to be able to spread them out so that you're either looking at a month, a year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, or 500 years. So you have different charts to pick and different mechanisms to look at it, but you're always using the same rules. But when you're in a system like that, you have to be really conscious and careful and thinking about, when am I doing too many? When am I doing too few? It's like if you're trying to look at a year at the beginning of the year, and you suddenly realize, well, I'm going to need to look at 100 charts to do this. You're going to just throw up your hands and go watch the Super Bowl. But you've got to get the length of the cycles you're working with to really work. And what this is basically saying is, we don't have major changes every 3 years.
Right.
We have major changes on a longer schedule. And it's some of that which is what also got me interested. Now, let me switch what I've got up here right now. I've got a couple things up here. Let me pick this. Okay, I'm going to see if I can expand this up for us, because this is a little small, and let me move it over. This is from my book, Astrology and Sustainability. What I had done is a very interesting thing. Neptune, Pluto has been for us over the last 90 years, essentially the longest cycle that we can look at, the longest synodic cycle. It's roughly 500 years. It's a little less. 500 years is, in a sense, longer than we can conceive, because we don't live that long. So, but what I've done here is I've shown the current and the last 2 cycles of when Pluto was in Sag, Pluto was in Capricorn, Pluto in Aquarius, and Pluto in Pisces. And I have to tell you, I'm already chomping at the book, at the bit to be talking about Pluto in Aquarius, because I'm ready to go there.
Me too. Oh my gosh. I was just talking about this with somebody else, and I said, hey, you want to come be on the Eat and Greets? Let's talk about Pluto and Aquarius. And they were like, we're not there yet. And I'm like, we are.
Well, technically we're not, but the whole point of astrology is that you can anticipate. So do it.
Yeah.
So what I had done is, as I say, I kind of dismiss the 3 cycles of Jupiter with the really outer planets, because they're so close to Jupiter's own cycle that they're not giving, I think, maximum information. But Jupiter-Saturn was the gold standard in the old days, and certainly we've just gone through a little piece of it right here last year. Mm-hmm. So what was interesting to me when I was putting this material together back around 2010 was this. Just don't read the things, just bring your eyes out. I'm going to focus it a little bit.
Your eyes.
And what you'll see is, in each of the signs, typically when Pluto was in any of these signs, you had about 2-3 conjunctions in the sign, except Pluto in Capricorn this time. And when I was looking at this and saw this big gap here, my reaction was, shit. And my reaction was shit because nothing in the way of a conjunction of any of these outer planets took place between the Jupiter-Saturn in 2000. And I mean, the Saturn-Pluto and the Jupiter-Saturn were just about on top of each other. So now you have to have a conjunction every 20 years because that's what the Jupiter-Saturn is. All the other ones are longer. when I saw this, I said, damn, here we are. Pluto goes into Capricorn, okay, and goes, because it's going from this nice Jupiter expansive period, which is what honestly we all like,
Yeah.
to Pluto's going into Capricorn. It's Earth, it's dark, it's depressing, and everybody but us Earth signs are going, yuck.
Yeah.
So,
tighten the belt a little.
Yeah. And for basically 20 years, there's no other cycle coming in to change that rhythm in a conjunctional sense, because it's the conjunction that is so important, because that's the reset button. So I looked at that and said, what this is going to be is this whole time of Pluto in Capricorn from here until into the mid-20s, where everybody is just going to be arguing with each other because there's nothing to resolve. And of course, this is politically exactly what the 20 teens were. So when I was writing the book back then, I said, don't expect to see any dominant political party in the 20 teens. It's just going to be back and forth with a lot of animosity and a lot of arguing and a lot of conflict, because you don't have a way to resolve it. And that's the thing. We may not have liked last year, but boy, did it reset a lot.
Sure did. It definitely, a lot of things we were awake in a way that we haven't been in a minute.
Mm-hmm. And we would not have chosen. Now, sure. Looking at this graph as it is, okay, so, I mean, talking about Pluto in Aquarius 2 years early isn't, I don't think that's especially outre. But so we've got a couple more years to endure of Pluto and Capricorn, and then we go into Pluto and Aquarius, and this and then the next major conjunction is Saturn Neptune in 2026. The point is, we don't have a long span like this, which means the level of conflict which we are experiencing right now is going to, in a sense, be shoehorned into a shorter period of time. Now, that doesn't mean the conflict is any less, but it just doesn't feel like you will never, ever, ever get out of it. Right. Because something like an ingress of an outer planet is a big shift in energy. And a planetary conjunction, these outer planet conjunctions, are also big shifts in energy.
Sure. Well, gosh, so, Saturn and Neptune conjunct each other. That's always interesting, huh?
I have it. I'm one of those Saturn Neptune people.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, the thing about something like that is, it's now also, I've got enough gray hair that I remember the last Saturn-Neptune conjunction in the astrological community, which was in Capricorn. And what was very interesting was this, when that occurred, was, as I recall, about 1989. And there's a big argument. NCGR held a conference in March of that year. It was in Houston. And they label, how conference organizers like to give a theme to their conference. Well, the theme that they selected was turning dreams into reality. And I was on the board at the time, and my somewhat unpolitic response to that was to say, well, to me, this looks more like turning your worst nightmares into reality. Because Neptune and Saturn, just, they don't play well together, because they're operating on a completely different level. Now, there are moments where it's interesting, because and that one had some of this quality as my birth one did, because that one Saturn was in Capricorn, so it was dignified. And I was born with the conjunction in Libra where Saturn's exalted. So you would think with those that Saturn ought to have the upper hand. No, 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 no. I had one moment at which was one of the peak experiences of the category you could do without, where I absolutely knew I was in a Saturn Neptune moment, which was I was driving in the San Francisco Bay Area in Oakland on what's out there called the Nimitz Freeway. And there was a pileup. And it was in that kind of telescoping time moment where you know that you can't not be in this accident.
Mm.
And as the car is coming in behind me to hit me, I realized the car was being driven by an underage driver who, hence by my definition, was incompetent for that reason. So it was probably going to be worse than it might be with somebody who could control speed. And so it's the moment where you realize maybe you're not going to live. And it was in that moment that the Neptune kicked in. And because normally I've got a lot of Earth in my chart, so I'm very much in the moment as far as the practicality is concerned. And I don't normally shift to alternate realities that dramatically. But in that moment I did. And I went, oh, Neptune, that's what this conjunction's about.
Right. Take the little bit of your life at your fingertips.
Because there was this real, I didn't do the whole history of my life thing. But what I did is to ask the question, did it on any ultimate level, did it matter whether I was alive or dead? Now that was really interesting.
Sure.
So, but that is it, because Neptune is saying of Saturn, all those boundaries you have are just arbitrary. And Saturn is basically saying of Neptune, how can you do anything at all? So very, it's a very challenging one to integrate. And I think the thing is, what we see on the mundane level is whatever the energy and manifestation of the planet is, when we do it in a group, we seldom do it well.
Sure. Well, and then there's just the ideas of the dissolvers and the creators. And so we still have that, the duality of all of that is going to be happening. And now the next time those two meet up will be in a double sign, so we get more, because more is more.
More is more.
Yeah. The cults.
So, but it also means that the stuff we're having now, we have a shorter period of time to linger over and lovingly do badly as a unit. I think people themselves, when you're experiencing these energies, like for example, anybody, in your group who has placements at 0 of the fixed signs or 0 of the air signs especially, was, I would say statistically, more impacted by the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction than somebody who doesn't. Okay. So, because there's a personal level. I mean, as a species, as a world, we had a major reset going on with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. I would argue the reset actually started in 1980 with the first of the Jupiter-Saturns in Libra. And we've had 40 years to adjust to this, and we still did it poorly as a species. But a lot of people did it well as individuals. But when you're really impacted in your own chart by that, you are the ones who are going to, it's like you're the ones who are going to carry the ball for the next 20 years. And so you do have you have more of an opportunity to really manifest that energy than people who aren't affected by it. Doesn't mean you can't otherwise, but it's kind of more like a natural and you don't have much choice.
Okay. You're in the game.
You're in the game. You're absolutely in the game.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So when we watch these cycles, though, and we look at beginning and end and how to exactly pinpoint when that is, is it like when it becomes exact, we're watching in a cycle, we're watching for the exact, or do you feel like as the application is happening, we already get the effects, we start to feel the impact? Or what's your standpoint there?
My standpoint is that this is part of the same cycle as the Aries ingress. The Aries ingress is a very special thing because it's the return of the sun to that point of spring, which is also the defining point of the tropical zodiac. And so my answer is, when you look at the question of when does an Aries ingress kick in, and the answer to when an Aries ingress kicks in is the same as in an individual solar return. Does it transition from the old solar return to the new solar return, or is there this magical moment where it suddenly manifests? There's very good evidence to suggest that the interval of transition is about a month. In other words, division by 12. Imagine where have we ever seen that before? So yeah, I tend to look at these in time-wise. It's harder to do, and there isn't actually a good answer to this on, in historical astrology as far as saying this. But when I've worked, it's like right now, why are you having the feeling you want to be talking about Pluto and Aquarius? Well, it's not that Pluto is in Aquarius right now, but you're feeling the energy. Mm-hmm. You're feeling the transition. It's like what we can be anticipating over these next couple of years is some really hunking, gigundous stories that are so Pluto and Capricorn, like this little Reddit shakeup of the market and of the idea of doing the kind of stock manipulation that is legal because the big guys do it.
Right. So, and done by GameStop, the ultimate Aquarian energy. The
ultimate Aquarian energy going up against the plutocrats.
Yeah.
Which is the ultimate Capricorn. So when this story broke, besides spending a little time laughing my ass off, my reaction was, this is exactly the kind of thing we expect. Mm-hmm. When Pluto was moving out of Sagittarius and into Capricorn, you were getting these stories about things like clerics. At that time it was shocking. Clerics getting involved sexually with, inappropriate people. Now it's like, oh, please, I don't want to even look at another one. But then it was shocking. You get the thing, because what you're looking at is whatever is the manifestation of the sign that it's in, it's like, okay, these last couple of years, it's like, I tend to think of Pluto a little differently, I think, than most modern astrologers, because, I'm mostly a classical astrologer. And I tend to think of Pluto as like one of those big chthonic forces. I'm one of the few people who will try to use the word chthonic in a complete sentence. But it's that old idea of the Greek fates, and that they envisioned fate as these goddesses who were literally weaving fate. But when you're weaving fate that way, you're weaving fate on the level of centuries or millennia. And when you think in those kind of time things, I mentioned before that the Neptune Pluto cycle is close to 500 years long. It's so much longer than we are that our consciousness doesn't work in those time intervals. And so for something to be happening on that scale, it's so much bigger than us that we can't conceive of it. So I think of Pluto especially, and by extension the other Plutoids and Plutinos and all the other stuff out there in in that region of space, that those are those bits of phonic process. And every so often it goes wham, and you can't anticipate it because it's not working. It's like us stepping on an ant. The ant can't anticipate it. The ant doesn't know where it's come from. And you don't even know you stepped on an ant.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that kind of bigger, larger cycle just coming in and smashing you, basically. And it doesn't apologize. You can, if you're still alive, and most of the time Pluto leaves you around to suffer, so most of the time you are alive. But you're shaking your fist at this fate, and you don't understand because karmically you don't see what it was that made it be you. Well, you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, because by your method of understanding, this is incomprehensible. So there are all these things playing, the universe is playing on many time dimensions beyond the ones we understand. And Absolutely. It's just, there are these moments where it happens to us.
So it leaves the thought, at least over here, of the reality of things like reincarnation, or things like living in multiple dimensions at one time, consistently moving within the weft of making and cleaning karma, Yeah. Oh, wow. Synodic cycles, friends. Have that with your coffee tomorrow and leave comments.
And see if it wakes you up any more than otherwise.
Yeah. Now, I had this other thought this year as we were kind of watching the things happen. And when GameStop happened as well, I just chuckled when I heard, because I thought, well, yeah, of course, that was on the round the river bend. But this thought of, is there a little bit of peace in truly just seeing and understanding the cycles, that in one hand, they were going to come, and they're coming on time all the time. So in that way, it doesn't make our timing or our experiencing of that cycle terminally unique from the ancients, right? Just our turn. So, I wonder is there to you a sense of semblance with just, I'm a part of the league of centuries of humans who've been experiencing the wave of what's happening?
Yes. And let me point that out through this graph as well, because this was actually one of the things that when I had started to write Astrology Sustainability, my thought about it was I was writing about Pluto and Capricorn, because I had the crazy idea that when Pluto got into Capricorn, knowing the state of the world right now with respect to the environment, knowing that there were a lot of issues there in terms of waste, in terms of energy, in terms of toxicity, that basically we can't escape because it's entropy and that's physics. Okay. And that's the thing. I mean, here we are to, however you define your terms, a spiritual core in a physical body on a physical planet. And so whatever the rules are of our spiritual life, which are much harder to determine, we also have to observe the laws of this materialism that we are enmeshed in. Mm-hmm. So I thought, with what Pluto does, with it being part of these larger cycles, this stuff has got to become more obvious, and it's going to have to be beginning to be dealt with in this period of Pluto and Capricorn. And of course, Capricorn itself, being the winter earth sign, implies a certain level of scarcity. So material scarcity. I mean, it doesn't, earth signs don't tend to affect the less material realm so much because their strength is on the material realm.
Material, yeah.
So we hit 2008, we hit the recession, Pluto switches in the Capricorn. Duh. And so that was kind of the level I was working at. But as I worked through this historically, I realized this is so much part of a bigger cycle. So what the book actually looks at, I originally put together a little diagram on literally on the back of an envelope, because I sit here with all this crap on my desk, and sometimes the available paper happens to be an envelope. And what I was doing was I was going back and I was looking at, okay, so when was the last time Pluto was in Capricorn? Okay, well, I found this one first, strangely. Okay, I'm thinking, Renaissance, And so I start running up charts of people like Lorenzo de Medici.
Oh, love Medici.
Right? And he's got freaking Pluto in Leo. And then I'm looking, and he's got Neptune in Libra. And it's like, the reason this is set up the way it is this. And that was, I've got some nice color illustrations in the book because this is something that's just too wild to believe, is that every other pass of Pluto in this sequence, you have Neptune in the same sign it's in right now, or at that time. At the alternate one, Neptune's in the opposite sign.
Sure.
So, and what this is, if we're talking about this technically, is that Neptune and Pluto are essentially locked in what's called the 3-2 harmonic. And that 3-2 harmonic, which is also, by the way, true of the other Plutoids. So Pluto is kind of, these days I'm seeing Pluto as kind of like the chairperson of the board of Plutoids. But that 3-2 is an old ratio. This is, you're getting into the realm of Pythagoras here. But on a practical level, what it means is every other pass is different. It's like it's the first and third and fifth, or the second and fourth and sixth that are the same. So what's the same here and here? And that was kind of the game I was playing. And then I got to throwing the synodic cycles on top of it as a kind of an interesting play. So as I said, this one was interesting because, hey, back then they had exactly the same thing that we had. This long period of time between any kind of conjunctional release. And look at the period in which this is going on. This is just after the Americas have been discovered. But if you go into Chinese history, you see stuff going on in Asia as well during this period of time. It was a very important time in terms of a societal change point. Sure.
Big things, big changes. And
right. Now, this was the next one. And this is one that I'm currently, I have a mystery point. And I encourage your listeners to join me in thinking about the mystery. Okay, so here's the mystery. Biggest thing we could argue historically, and I like to read historians who don't know astrology because I want to know what they say is the biggest thing. Right. I don't want to do it as an astrologer because then I'm going to bias myself. Mm-hmm. So the biggest thing in this period of time is Martin Luther. Luther comes in, he gets scared of a thunderstorm. He says to God, if you'll spare me from the lightning, I'll become part of your church, and yada, yada. And then he notices all the corruption going on in the Catholic Church. And he pulls out, and it was just the right moment. I think of it as kind of like a moment of ignition. There was so much energy already with people being aware of what they consider to be the material corruption of the church, that if it wasn't going to be Luther, it was going to be somebody else.
Sure.
And that somebody else was going to be within 20 years. You just know it. So that split of what to that point was called the Universal Church. There's a splintering. Okay. Fast forward, American Revolution, but not the French Revolution. The French Revolution and the Reign of Terror comes under Pluto in Aquarius.
Okay. So
that's something to think about. But it's the alternate one, so maybe we don't have to do it that explicitly.
Be nice to skip. Be nice to skip that.
Mm-hmm. So, what is on the cosmic level in this period of time, 2008 to 2023, which is the equivalent of either the Protestant Reformation or the American Revolution?
Lee. This is fabulous.
What is it?
Well, we're going to have another little revolution, maybe minus all of the rest of the drama on the other side. But I'm thinking here in the United States, I'm thinking about this Pluto return. And that if this is what this looks like in this.
And why is it a Pluto return? Because this is exactly what we're talking about, Stormie. Because that's where Pluto was when we were mixing it up. And for that, we don't even have to look so much at what the chart was. This is just saying this was the energy going on, and look at the time period. It was the setup to the American Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think one of the questions that when we're looking at things as an astrologer, you know, and for example, what's the chart of the Brits? Okay, we've got Hastings, the Battle of Hastings, 1066. And then you've got the various charts for the Union of England and Scotland, you know, the Union of England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And then you've got to bring Wales into that. So you have United Kingdom ideas and you've got England ideas. And in the end, they all kick. But what is a country? If you're looking at the chart for France, you can go way back to, say, the crowning of Charlemagne, although that wasn't, you know, we used the French version of his name instead of Karl der Grosse, but so it wasn't perfectly France, but that's you know, it's a foundational piece of France. Then you've got the dynasties, then you've got the French Revolution, then you've got Napoleon, then you've got, you know, the first, second, third, and fourth republic up to the fifth. So you can use any of those charts. But what most Americans focus in on as the chart of the United States was an aspirational document. And the US didn't exist yet.
Right. Right.
So, you know, these are things we need to really stop and think about. And I'm not saying an aspirational document has no meaning. It may have the most meaning of all. But we have to think about what that means when that's our choice. But what we can all honestly say is this is the period of time where people in the then colonies started feeling really pissed off.
Right.
And they started saying, no, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yeah. And so
this is the period where we finished the job. You know, this is the period where the rest of the revolution ran. We had Yorktown and the fighting was over with. We had the Treaty of Paris. We had the start of first the Articles of Confederation and then the Constitution. So there's actually a lot of very early history. By 1797, we had the plan. We'd had Washington. We had the inauguration set and all that stuff. So we're starting to, you know, work it, as it were. But Very interesting when you think about that.
No, it is really interesting when we think about that. And I was downstairs and we have a little copy of the Constitution, the amendments, all of those good things. So my husband's a big history buff. And I was looking at them one day and I was like, now, astrologically, these are all important points in the United States. And how does that fit into the story? And now you've got me ready to think about this historical document moment. Oh my God. I knew when you came over, I was going to need to be hydrated and ready to think about things. I knew it. I was like, she's going to blow some conception I've had out of the water and I'll have something new to think about. Wow. I'm going to really need to be with that and think about that in my practice, because if we're looking at everything going forward.
Yes. And that's the whole thing, because, it's not like I woke up this morning and said, now, how am I going to drive Stormie crazy? I did not have to do that.
No.
But these are the kind of questions I ask myself, because there's so many things, it's virtually impossible to make a living as a mundane astrologer. So, I'm making a living my specialties are primarily medical, electoral, and horror. And I do a lot of teaching of that. And that's primarily my practice, although, I do have the occasional relationship chart that I have to do. But the thing is, mundane is fascinating and addicting. And it forces you to ask these larger questions. And I think for us, when I'm thinking about this material, I'm also thinking about me. I'm thinking about my clients. Mm-hmm. When I was looking at this material, creating this book, which came out in, I think, 2011, I was doing, lectures at some of the groups afterwards. And one of the things I was saying to people is, look, you need to be where you want to be by 2020. I really said that. I had that in a PowerPoint. And, it's like, who knew? But the cycles were saying this. And, and yet, you try to say, well, yeah, this is happening out there. But out there is also in here. And it has to do with what all of us basically want. What do people want? You want to feel comfortable. And then you want tomorrow to be like today. That's basically it. Because if you're not comfortable, you don't want tomorrow to be like today. But if you are, now you want a replay. You want Groundhog Day with it for the rest of your life.
The good Groundhog Days, right?
Right. But this is why you can't have it. But as astrologers, we should be able to think about this. We should be able to communicate this. Whether it's to ourselves, our families, our clients, our friends, because thinking about this means that maybe there were 2 or 3 people in those audiences who went, okay, 2020, I've always wanted to move to Denver. And so I have to do it by 2020.
Right.
And maybe they moved, I don't know, but we should be able to take that information and use it for ourselves.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That's kind of the point too, to studying the larger cycles, is to see when, how, where to move, to settle, to rise, to do these things, and to be able to do that, I think, in tandem, at least rhythmic tandem with the collective. Right? Don't work smarter, not harder. Right?
Yeah, and this isn't necessarily that you are a conformist in the collective. But for example, was there value in knowing going into the 20 teens that basically you could expect a lot of political instability? If you're a business person, does that matter to you? Well, it should. If you're trying, if you are trying to create that comfortable life for your family,
Right.
And you realize this is not the time where that's really going to happen, at least in its entirety. And if it's going to happen for me, it better be in a situation where I'm out of the firing line.
Right. Right. Oh my gosh. Well, I don't know about you guys out there, but just this whole, I'm just still stuck on the document. I'll be thinking about that for the next 2 years and sorting out what that means for my whole life. But the synodic cycles give us time to ask questions. And I think especially right now, we've got the nodes moving through Gemini and Sag. And the question that's big for me is, why do I do what I do? Why do I believe that? And this has definitely given me something to think about. So hopefully something for you guys as well. But Lee, before we wrap up, if this was like too much, where can people start? Right? I don't think it was, but we have a vast audience. So if somebody wants to gently ease in, where do they go? And then, if they're a little bit more advanced, what would you say in how to begin the study or the conversation of this?
Okay. If you are at least at an intermediate level, my book, Astrology Sustainability, goes through this. And basically it starts with talking about how do you do mundane astrology, because actually it is secretly, which you can't tell from the title, it's actually a book on how do you do mundane.
Okay.
And this material is in here. This is actually, you can see up here, summary, suggestions, and conclusions. This table is actually from the last chapter. But I've got the rest of the book to go there and kind of show how this happens. And basically what I've organized the book around Pluto and the different elements. So it's kind of a different structure. But, it makes the point about how to think about these, because honestly, I'm talking about Pluto in the elements, but anything in the elements has a certain semblance. So that's one place. I will be talking about this material. I'll be talking specifically about the Barbeau chart next month at the Empowering Astrology Conference that Kathy Rose runs. And I know you've had Elizabeth on. I don't remember whether you've had Kathy on, Stormie.
I have.
Yes. So at her conference, I'll be doing a full lecture on this, and what basically we'll start with this diagram and then talk about why we want to look at it right now and how it works in application. And I'll be talking about basically doing the same kind of predictions for the decade of the 2020s that I did for the 20-teens at a pre-conference workshop at ESAR this year.
Okay. So we'll be there hydrated and ready to take it in and see what new thoughts.
Now, any of the people in your audience who know French, scare up some Andre Barbeau. It's wonderful material. There's one volume of his, and I'm looking to see if I have it handy, that's been published in English. And Stormie, I'll get the material for you. But there's one volume that's been published in English that talks about these cycles as well.
Okay. Whew. I feel like I've had an event.
And maybe that's why you had to drop out for a few minutes.
Yeah, maybe because they were like, you're not ready. Get it together. Well, my gosh. You guys, hopefully we've given you something that is worth the time you took to show up. Maybe it's even left you with some questions, things to think about before you watch Lee speak again, and then you can take in some more, or maybe it just hit you and you're lit up. But whatever it is, I hope it was worth the time you took to spend with us. And Lee, thank you for being patient and wonderful and informative. This is fabulous.
Cool.
I don't even know. See, look, you've left me stunned with my own thinking, which I approve and appreciate. All right, you guys, look, I'm going to make sure all of Lee's information are beneath the video in the description box. I'll also list the books that she's talking about and some resources. I'll also put the link for the Empowering conference that's coming up as well. There's a lot going on in the astro community. We're having lots of conversations. So whichever niche or topic or idea gets you, I promise it is out there for you to be learning about. So thank you so much again, you guys, for showing up. Lee, thank you for coming, and you are welcome back anytime.
Oh, it's been fun, Stormie. It really has.
Brilliant. All right, you guys, we shall see you next time. Bye, everybody.